I remember about 4 years ago being absolutely captivated by a game called Deadlight by Tequila Works. So here we are in 2016 and the definitive edition has been released on Xbox One and PlayStation 4. And it's kind of unusual because the game was a 2D side-scroller that was very much stylized and sort of shadows and blacks and whites, and that's pretty much still here. And actually there are times when technically it hiccups, and that's even more surprising because the game looks very much like what it looked on Xbox 360, but you can tell there is some touches have been made to it. But it's very much largely the same game, but with an added mode called Survival, which is just not good. It's not what made Deadlight enjoyable in the first place, and then the combat has never been about sort of a lot of action. It's been about the story. It's been about looking at the world and the areas and figuring out getting from area to area, hearing the story and uncovering what's happened to people and locations that you go through. And the survival mode sort of condenses that sort of sometimes heart-racing, sort of heart-pounding moments in the story where you've got to run and you've got to figure out a way to take on a fair number of enemies. But that's just constant in the survival mode, and it's something I've tried a couple of times, got to a few minutes, and then sort of felt like I was done with it. Where the story is still, if you know of Cormac McCarthy's The Road, it's sort of a bit like that. It takes place in Seattle. Zombies have overrun it, but it's very dark and gritty and quite gory and that. But the voice acting is worse than I remember. I don't know if it's overemphasized or it's weirdly delivered. It's just not the thing that will keep you invested in the story. It's definitely the world. The world is incredible to look at from all the backdrops you see and moving from area to area and sort of going through locations and picking up secrets and understanding stories and figuring out what's happened there. The play is fine. There's a fair bit of like sort of platforming and jumping around, and it's not incredibly responsive. Sometimes I've wanted it to jump straight up and he'd jump off to the left or the right and he'd die. It's not perfect. It's not really perfect. It's got its problems. The melee combat doesn't feel very effective. He'll sometimes, if the zombies get too close, he'll push instead of swing, and that sort of takes a bit of a little bit too long because there are other zombies that will just come in and smack you down, and you can die pretty easily. I've had moments where I'd get grabbed by a zombie when I was underneath something, and then while I'm mashing the B button, I'd be clipping through the object I'm underneath, and then all of a sudden I'd bounce down, or I'd be jumping onto something and I'd move in weird positions, like I wouldn't be hanging onto the thing I'm supposed to be hanging onto. And I don't really remember that happening with the previous version. So I don't know if these are new quirks, new bugs and problems, or if they were always there and I just didn't encounter them the first time round. But there is something about Deadlight. I've been actually kind of harsh on it, but at the same time, it's one of those games that I've been in a fortunate position to have played hundreds of games, and Deadlight stayed with me. I remember fairly well some of the areas I went to, and especially the aesthetic and sort of the lack of music. You can just hear everything as you move around, and then you hear the groan of a zombie or just the voices, and it's effective in that sense, but at the same time the delivery wasn't always great. Some of the dialogue can be quite clumsy, but like I said, it's the world, it's the aesthetic, it's moving around and understanding and learning the stories of this broken world. And I mean, some of the gunplay is fun, some of those moments are great when you're running and you've got to get away. Like, that's a great thing about Deadlight. It's not asking you to constantly fight. Sometimes you're going to have to run, and when you do and it works well and the controls hold up, it's quite thrilling. But it does have its few problems, and it's not one. I don't know if it would have been one of the games I would have said, yeah, it's got to be made definitive edition, because there wasn't a lot that could be done to it. But at the same time, it's one of my favourite sort of 2D side-scrolling games from the last generation, so it was another chance to play through it. And if you haven't, then you actually probably should, even though it has its little problems.